So in this video, we're actually going to be taking a look at this vehicle, but to address the monstera in the room. This is my monstera plant. It is not going to stay in here, but rather it's going to be in a video that comes out later today, though I filmed it yesterday, so I wanted to introduce it at the beginning of this video as well. It is a 2+ year-old plant that I got as a cutting as a little guy 2 years ago, so it's older than that, but close enough, right? And you don't have to worry about the yellow leaves. That's actually a natural thing that these guys do. They're recycling the nutrients in those smaller leaves to put out bigger leaves as we start to warm up. All questions will be answered in that video, so go ahead and check it out. Should be up later today. With that said, though, let's focus back on this guy here. So this is the new, one of the new Technic space sets, and it's really, really lovely. The aesthetic of it right off the bat is super nice. I did opt to remove the stickers for what it's worth, or leave them off rather, with the exception of the hubcap sticker. And if you guys want to look at like a full review of this, then I would definitely recommend channels like JANGBRICKS, or channels that are more focused on Technic, like Racing Brick, like Sariel, who I don't believe have put out videos on this yet. JANGBRICKS has, at the very least, so their video is up already. This is more of a look over the vehicle itself, because I don't really have the setup for a full review. That said, it is a lovely vehicle for what it's worth, and the mechanisms in here are pretty clever. I will say that the mechanisms on the back end are pretty straightforward. You have steering connected to this blue knob, and I'm going to be honest, placement of that knob, not great. Now, there's not a lot of travel in it because it is a direct drive system, so it doesn't move very far, but because of these little plastic extra bits here, these little stoppers, it's very easy to just kind of hit your fingers on those when you're moving. It's just kind of annoying. It doesn't need to be that way. Is it a big deal? No, absolutely not. Is it a deal killer? No, of course not. I would also prefer, honestly, a textured knob rather than a smooth one. Not because it's hard to turn, but it just feels more secure and it feels more professional. Let's be honest. The blue here it's not necessary. With that said, though, you also get the red knob on the back, which that one I'm a little more fine with. Yes, it sticks out pretty far. You could definitely pretend it's exhaust of some kind. You could change it out for a different color. You could change it out for a different length of knob in general. And that is driving a gear that is new to me, but not new to Technic, a 20-tooth gear, but not a bevel gear. It's a really interesting piece in dark azure of all colors, too, which is fascinating. I love getting things in new colors. So that's an interesting choice of that color. I do hope we get neutrals of those gears as well. But with that said, that also means that you can gear this up, meaning that the mechanism, the main mechanism of this build, is actually something that can be sped up. That said, I actually think it works at a pretty appropriate speed overall, given that this is a sort of interplanetary vehicle. A lot of those vehicles tend to be on the slower side for various reasons. This one is no exception to that. And this works at least what to me feels like a good speed. This is it at its end as well, so it's not going to go back any further than that, and then you can move it forward as well. The mechanism, as I described in a previous video, is in fact a parallel geometry. Nothing fancy, but they do use something that's a bit clever involving this yellow knob gear in here. And actually, if we take a look at the underside, you'll see this gray offset knob gear. And that one's a really cool piece. First off, it's brand new to 2024, which is always nice to get new pieces. But also what's interesting about it is that it's actually locked in place. It is stationary. It does not move. And what that means is interesting. So as these arms move, what you need to understand with parallel linkages is that as they move past each other, the angles still change. So although everything remains parallel, those angles are still inputting something. And in this case here, because those gears are stationary and in a fixed position, what happens is that yellow gear is actually forced to ride over top of it. That turns that yellow gear. And in so doing, if my brain is working this math correctly, it should move forward at double the speed that the linkage lifts up. That sounds like it's going faster, and technically it is, but because the linkage is also moving backwards, it kind of cancels out in a way. So for your intents and purposes, all you need to know is that if you consider a speed unit of 1 lifting, then the wheels should also correct at a speed of 1. Does that make sense? Technically a speed of 2, but 2 minus 1 is 1. You get the point. Anyway, I am explaining this poorly, but that's fine. I knew I was going to. I am not the perfect person at describing this kind of stuff, but it's still, all you need to take away from it is it is a fascinating and fun mechanism, and it's very simple to understand as well. But yeah, you can see that that yellow knob gear is slowly turning, and because it's turning at twice the speed, it technically corrects for itself. If it was turning at equal speed, then it would actually pretty close to match the orientation of the cockpit, if that makes sense. But because it's moving at double speed, anyway, I'm not going to get into any more of that. And I probably have some of my math wrong as well. I'm just kind of like doing this in my head. So for all intents and purposes, really, really cool function. Now, I will say one thing that might bother some people is there's a lot of play in this. I don't actually hate that. It's clear that this could have been fixed with other types of designs, but this is a fairly simple, fairly inexpensive way to do it. And honestly, because of the force required to get it to move like that, it almost feels intentional. It almost feels like suspension, which I actually kind of like. So would I have preferred less play? Sure. But this kind of play, and with the force that's required to do it, it actually feels pretty good. Is it meant to be suspension? No, absolutely not. It's a byproduct of the mechanism, and it's a byproduct of doing it in the way that LEGO has done it. Now, it is a fairly gappy build in the center, but I don't actually hate that. I think it feels appropriate for what it is, because the way I see this vehicle is that basically the front pod is essentially the cabin where, you know, humans exist, or humans pilot this in atmosphere, if you want to consider it that. Yes, there are gaps and things, and your human's probably wearing a spacesuit, but for all intents and purposes, the back end doesn't, it's like the back of a truck, right? You know, when you're driving, you're never usually getting back there. So this is all stuff that you worry about when the vehicle is like parked, or when the vehicle, whatever, right? With that said, the mechanism itself is kind of basic back here. It's all directly driven, as I mentioned, so there's no like gearing or fancy geometry here. And again, that is a parallel linkage as well, which is perfectly fine. However, as you noticed, I criticized the lift itself in previous videos, not because it doesn't work. It does exactly what it's intended to do, and I think for what it's worth, this gives you a very affordable vehicle that has some extra playability. But when I see something, you know, that's marketed as a lift, as a loader, etc., I want to see it load things, you know, so I'd prefer an actual like crane arm or something on this, as simple as one might be. So as fun as this is, as well as this works, it does have its issues, it does have its limitations. Obviously, one issue being the collision with the back wheel itself, meaning you basically always have to lift this up, and a lot of this stuff is left exposed. It feels unfinished at the end of the day, but that's fine. For this price point, I think you are really getting an exceptional deal, honestly. $35 for this is pretty good. $35 is even better when you consider the mechanisms, how they work, and how it kind of teaches you about them too, because some really clever stuff going on here, and especially with like how these wheels are attached in design. There's some interesting and complicated geometry going on in there as well to make all that work. There's also some reasonably new pieces included on this that are, I want to say rare, but I don't know. They've probably been out in Technic for a while, but at the very least are not the most common things in the world. One example being this little black piece here, which is a fun piece in general, but it's just, you know, a simple piece at the end of the day. So a handful of really interesting pieces. These wheels, as far as I know, are exclusive to this set, or if not exclusive, at the very least in Technic, they are exclusive here, which is really fun to see. And of course, the cabin itself can open quite easily just by pulling this off, though it does kind of, the axles here are a bit loose, or feel a bit loose to me. So, oh, something else I didn't notice till just now, though, is that this chair is not affixed in on the bottom of anything, so that can move really easily. That bothers me a little bit, but because gravity is pulling it down, it's not really something you're going to run into an issue with most of the time. And then of course, again, those little tiny arms, would love to fix them. So that is what I plan to do next. Plan to work on this model, to fix up this model a bit, and just kind of play around with it, have fun, you know, make it what I want it to be, what I think it's capable of being. The last thing I want to mention too is it does have this little handle on the top, which you can use to lift it, and it's a good balance as well, good right around the center of gravity, which is nice. And of course, you can probably utilize this with the VTOL vehicle. Can't remember what it's called right now. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, yes, it does have a side build. Yes, it has the reddish orange color, which is glorious. I love it. This is the first time I've seen it in real life, and it looks so good. And on top of that, you do get some other interesting pieces as well, including a little amiibo tile print and an extra of it as well, which is always nice. And another interesting piece, which I've seen but never really thought about, this one here. This is an anti-stud pin rather than a stud pin. It's a really fascinating piece, and I plan to explore uses for this more. It's also bright green, which is an interesting color choice for it. Actually, is that bright green or is that regular green? I'll have to check it out later. I think it's bright green. Overall, really interesting pieces, like I said. So would I recommend this set if you have $35 to spend? And $35 is what I would consider the top of the low range pricing for Technic. Then yeah, absolutely. I think you'll really enjoy this. It's a lovely looking set. It looks and feels complete. And it feels like it's something that would be fun to improve without just alienating itself at all. It's a good set. I recommend it. And yeah, so that's pretty much it for the video. If you did enjoy this video and you want to check out more information on it, again, I will link JANGBRICKS channel, probably the video specifically for this. And then if Racing Bricks, if Sariel have videos on this out right now, then I'll link those videos. If not, I will link their channels so that you can check them out in the future if they do cover this set. I imagine they will. And of course, you can join the conversation down in the comments if you have this set. Let me know your thoughts on it, or let me know which of these Space Technic sets, or just Technic sets in general, that interests you. And of course, you can check out the Discord, Instagram, and Patreon, all of which in the description below if you want to support Channel Kids Perks. And I will see you all in the next one. Take care.